And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have the one and only Ezra Levant from Canada, from Rebel News, join us once again. Ezra, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. I love the UK, and I love the kind of battles you're in, Peter. So it's great to catch up with you.
Well, I know you're having similar battles in Canada, and we'll get into all of that. But obviously, that is Ezra's handle on X on Twitter. There, Ezra Levant and rebelnews.com. Make sure you're following it. Make sure you've subscribed to all the alerts and all the great work that Rebel are doing, not just in Canada, but all over in with Avi down in Australia. I've seen Sammy Woodhouse doing work for you in the UK. And your reach gets ever larger, Ezra. And two of those I saw you on with Alex Jones talking about being protein bars. That was the conversation, and also Jordan Peterson. I know that's just dropped. I've watched some clips of it, haven't had a chance, but tell us a little bit about that, because your relationship with Jordan goes back many years.
I mean, I live in Toronto, Canada, and that is where Jordan Peterson was a professor at the University of Toronto, not too far away from our studio. So I guess it's almost 10 years ago now, we heard of this professor who was fighting for free speech, and he was staring down the woke crew. And I thought, "Oh, this guy doesn't know how it's going to go. It's going to end with him being canceled, doesn't he know?" But we were very excited that he was going to try, and we were very young. Rebel News started in 2015, so I think this was in 2016. We still didn't really know what we were doing, but we went down to the University of Toronto, and we saw this guy give this amazing outdoor sort of lecture and rally, and the bad guys tried to silence him, and they brought big amplified loudspeakers. They were playing white noise to try and drown him out. And anyhow, we were just riveted. We thought, who is this guy? Well, turns out that was sort of the moment where Jordan Peterson became a public intellectual, and he wasn't canceled. Well, they tried to cancel him in a few minor ways, including his professional association, but it didn't stop him. I'd say he's the most prominent Canadian public intellectual in the world. Now, that you might say that's like saying he's the tallest short guy or something, but no, he really is a worldwide tastemaker of conservative and alternative and anti-woke ideas. Anyhow, so it was fun to go on his podcast. I mean, he's so big now, but we had a bit of a catch up, and I like what he's doing, and he really has filled the void for a lot of people, answering the question, how to be a man. And I mean, obviously he talks about other things, and women can learn a lot from him too. But I think there's this huge, I'm not even going to call it a niche because that sounds small, but for a generation, the world has been emasculated. It starts in schools. Girl power. Oh, I'm not going to, the boys have their hands up. Put your hands down, boys. I'm just going to ask the girls. And it's subtle, and, but after a generation, boys and men are told not only are they personally not wanted, but the idea of being male and some of those male attributes, courage, risk-taking, using masculine violence or masculine force for good to protect people, for example, like the whole idea of a military has been so deracinated. I see that's happening in the UK as well. And so Jordan Peterson and Gavin McInnes and even the Tate brothers, who I think have some real problems, but they have filled this void because no one even says it's okay to be a man, let alone a white man. I mean, that's the lowest of the pecking order. Well, there's something lower. The British working class white man is the lowest on the totem pole politically. And even if he voted Labor, his own party despises him. And I think a lot of these things have come to a boil at the same time.
Oh, I think they have. And you mentioned white working class, and you for years have supported Tommy Robinson and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. While as we're recording this, he's in solitary confinement for 128 days, and you've been a key figure, I think, worldwide on highlighting that injustice, and that's one of many issues. But I could talk to you about all those things for all day, but I want to talk to you about Canada. Canada being part of the Anglosphere, and the key countries, of course, the UK, the US, Australia, and New Zealand, and of course the security alliance as well, with the Five Eyes of those countries, and also very economically important as part of the G7. But politically, there has been this huge gulf between your next door neighbor. And I'm wondering, tell us about that, the Trudeau-Trump relationship. How's that been going? I think as we record this, just 2 days before President Trump imposed tariffs 25%, and Trudeau has responded. How how is that relationship between those two individuals going?
I think Donald Trump actually gets along with people who have been critical or mean to him. I mean, look at his own cabinet. Marco Rubio challenged him in 2016. He gave him the nickname Little Marco. Ted Cruz, he called him Lion Ted. Like a lot of, I mean, J.D. Vance called Trump a Nazi or something, or almost a crypto Nazi. Or I forget what phrase he used. Um, so many people who have used mean words to Trump, you would think he's brittle and can't get over it. It's sort of the opposite. He meets with people. I mean, even David Lammy and Keir Starmer. I think, in fact, I have a theory, Peter, that Trump likes it when people are really mean to him. Why would he like that? Because when he finally meets with them, the elephant in the room is, oh, you've got to make it up to me. Like David Lammy, the foreign secretary of the UK, has said such outrageous things about Trump. And Keir Starmer wasn't much better. I mean, and it's every Western leader. I mean, Simon Harris of Ireland called him. He used some Irish slur,
Yes.
and Trump. I think Trump loves meeting with guys like that because they know that psychologically the other party feels they have to offer some sort of penance or ask for forgiveness in some way. So I think, and Trump shows that he could. I mean, look what Trump how he flipped Mark Zuckerberg.
Mm.
Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, founder of Facebook, one of the largest, not only a donor to Democrat causes, but by filtering and throttling and censoring Facebook, really has a lot of responsibility for not only Trump losing in 2020, but Bolsonaro, his defeat in Brazil, um, Le Pen's defeat in France. You would think Trump would never want to meet with an enemy. But look, he flipped Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg laid off 40,000 censors, says he's going to stand up for free speech, including around the world. He's going to stop censoring transgenderism conversations. So do you see what Trump did? He met with a guy and thought, well, how can I get 1+1 = 3? So back to your question, I Trump really likes to yank Trudeau's chain. I mean, we all do. Trudeau's so insufferable. He's a typical male feminist. And you know what I mean by that. There's nothing. I think there's nothing that a guy hates more than spotting a male feminist. Like anytime someone's a male feminist, I believe they're preemptively trying to, like, they're actually a kind of a predator or a sexist. They're just, I mean, there was a very famous male feminist in Canada named Jian Ghomeshi. He was a star on our CBC state broadcaster. He took women's studies in school. Could you imagine a guy taking women's studies? Well, why would you do that, Peter? Because that's, as Al Capone said, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why are you taking women's studies? What do you do? Well, because that's where the girls are. And it turns out that this male feminist who took women's studies was actually an abusive predator the whole time. And the whole male feminist shtick was to say, no, no, no. Jian Ghomeshi couldn't possibly be hitting those girls. He has a women's studies degree. Trudeau is the same way. Trudeau leads with feminism in everything he does, including our military. And we actually know he despises women who are strong. Basically he fires any woman who disputes with him. We know he sexually assaulted a woman named Rose Knight in Creston, BC. And when called on it, he said, well, she experienced it differently. There's a classic line. So, yeah, Trudeau is awful. He's like a dumber Keir Starmer. At least Keir Starmer I think he's smart. I don't think you could be a top barrister and the head of prosecutions if you're just dumb. Like Keir Starmer is book smart, and you can tell he reads. He makes awful decisions. I think he's immoral, but he's not stupid. I think Trudeau is stupid. He's got some social skills, that's for sure. High EQ, as the kids would say. But he's been awful. Luckily, he is going to be gone in a matter of days. He announced his resignation in January. He'll be gone on March 9th.
Well, I want to get into all of that as well. But I mean, the Canada and the US, I think the US are Canada's second biggest trade partner, vice versa. I mean, it's huge with that land border. And it's one thing for Trump to mock and ridicule and make fun of the Europeans. They're quite far away. With the land border there in Canada, and how important is that trade relationship? And yeah, we'll talk about who's coming next, but it is essential that trade continues. And how is that going so far?
Well, you're right. And the US and Canada have had various free trade agreements almost for 40 years now. In fact, Donald Trump renegotiated the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. So he can't really complain about it since he himself negotiated it in his first term. One of the things he complains about is a trade surplus. That is, we sell a lot more stuff to America than they sell to us. And Trump says that he's subsidizing us with that trade surplus. That's not really what a trade surplus means. I'll tell you where this trade surplus comes from. Canada sells a fair bit of stuff to the States, automobiles, for example. But by far, our largest export to America is oil. The U.S. burns about 20 million barrels of oil every day. And they produce an enormous amount. They're as big as Russia or Saudi Arabia in terms of production, but that's only half. So the U.S. still imports half of its oil every day. And lucky for the U.S., Canada's right there. Canada actually has the third largest reserves in the world behind Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. We have something called the oil sands. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. It's just what it sounds like, sort of oily sand. And it wasn't until about 20 years ago that science and technology figured out how do you separate the oil from the sand in an economic way. And now it's just enormous. I mean, the oil sands, I forget the exact stats, it's like 4 million barrels a day from the oil sands. And most of the companies operating there are either American companies or they're Canadian companies with a lot of American investors. So it's basically American companies producing the oil sands in Canada and then selling them to US refineries to turn into gasoline. And so and I'm a huge Trump supporter. 3 elections in a row, we've endorsed him. And I think that makes us unique in Canada. I literally don't think anyone else in Canada has been as Trumpy as we've been. But it doesn't make sense to put a tariff on the oil sands because you put a tariff on an auto factory, and I don't recommend that Trump does so, but the theory is you move the factory to America. Honda just announced it's going to move a factory from Mexico to the U.S. because of tariffs. But you can't move the oil sands. It is where it is. So all that's happening is you're just adding a tax to your U.S. refineries that are buying that stuff. I don't think that's very America first. In fact, I just wrote a book. Peter, I didn't mention to you. Just a week ago, I published a book called Deal of the Century, the America First Plan for Canada's Oil Sands. And I basically say, in America First language, I say, look, the move here is not to tariff that oil because you're not going to move the oil sands into America. If you're not buying oil from Canada, you're buying it from OPEC or Russia. And I wrote a book a dozen years ago called Ethical Oil, the case for Canada's oil sands. And I made the left-wing argument, Peter. I said, Canada's oil is like the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. If you care about the environment, if you care about peace, if you care about the treatment of workers, if you care about civil rights, you've got to admit that Canadian oil is superior to OPEC oil or Russia oil or, even Brazilian or Mexican oil. That's the left-wing argument for the oil sands. The America First argument is displace your OPEC imports. To this day, America still buys oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Stop, don't do that. First of all, you're giving money to the bad guys. And second of all, you know how much money the U.S. spends patrolling the Persian Gulf sea lanes every year? I've read estimates that the Pentagon spends $50 billion with a B. That's something that the whole Fifth Fleet is stationed there. Why? To protect those oil tankers. Well, what are you doing? If you just doubled your imports from Canada, don't try and reduce your imports, double your imports from Canada, you can displace all that Saudi conflict oil. There's conflict oil and there's ethical oil. Conflict oil, you got to bring it in from the Middle East. You're always entangled in foreign wars. You're spending $50 billion a year patrolling the sea lanes, and nothing good comes from it other than strife and, people saying Allah Akbar. You buy that oil from Canada. First of all, you're buying it from an American company. Maybe with the extra money, Canada can contribute more to its NATO obligations. And you're closing. Yeah, you are going to be spending more in Canada, but we're the friendly neighbor. So that's the case I make. I want to say one last thing, and it goes to your first question, which I didn't answer very well, which is Trudeau and Trump. I think Trump likes yanking Trudeau's chain. Who doesn't? The guy's gross. But there's better ways to get back at Trudeau than by tariffing the whole country. Let me throw something at you. I don't know if you saw the news, but a couple of weeks ago, Trump was deporting some people to, I think it was Colombia, the country in South America. And they were on, I think, some U.S. cargo jets or something. And the president, I think it was Colombia, left-wing guy, refused for those planes to land. And Trump heard about this on the golf course, and he was furious. And he said to his team, put sanctions on the ruling party, stop all visas from Colombia. And basically, he got super personal. And in less than an hour, the president of Colombia went on Twitter and basically said, sorry. And he actually sent his presidential jet to pick up the migrants. But in that 1 hour time period, Trump said, you defy me, your entire family and all your friends and all your staff and all your congressmen or whatever, none of them are allowed to go to the United States. Suck on that for a bit. No more trips to Miami to visit your cousins. No more spending sprees, in Miami. And so in my book, Art of the Deal, I propose that Trump put sanctions on Trudeau, bans Trudeau from going to this. Trudeau loves going to New York, freezes any bank accounts Trudeau has in the States. Focus on Trudeau, the idiot, not Canada, the country. So that's if Trump wants to take a bite out of Trudeau, that's the way to do it. And that's in my book.
And let me just bring it up. There it is. If you go to rebelnews.com, you can get it there. You can click on it, dealofthecenturybook.com. All the links we'll put in the description. So make sure and get a hold of your copy. Ezra, you mentioned Trudeau stepping down. You've got elections coming up later in the year, October. But for the Conservatives, you've got Pierre Poilievre. He's been leader of the Conservative Party of Canada for 2.5 years now. Has been polling really well until recently, where there was a bit of a blip. His message seems to be about common sense. How effective has he been in getting that message of common sense out?
Super effective. Until about a month ago, he had a 20-point lead over the Liberals. People were so sick of Trudeau for every reason you can imagine. In fact, they'd hold pollsters. Sometimes pollsters say, do you like him a little or like him a lot? Do you dislike him a little or dislike him a lot? And it's like a bell curve. Most people are sort of moderate in the middle. Trudeau is so hated in Canada that poll after poll, if you said, how do you feel? People didn't just say, I dislike Trudeau. They said, I hate him. And Pierre Poilievre was the beneficiary of that. And Poilievre does a really good job of things. But you take the most hated man in Canadian politics out of the equation, Trudeau's gone on March 9th. Automatically, you're going to shrink that gap. And then add to it what I was just talking about, Trump yanking Trudeau's chain. Trump keeps talking about making Canada the 51st state. Now, that is appealing to some people who think Canada is being wrecked by Trudeau. It really is. You're a young person, can't afford to buy a house. You're a young man and are treated with contempt by the woke establishment. You have been taught not to have pride in your own country. Trudeau called it a post-national country with no core values. Trump comes along and says, I'll make you rich. I'll give you protection of our military. Come join the party. You know, about 40% of young people in some polls say they like that. But other Canadians feel offended. It would be like someone coming up to you and you're married and they're proposing to you even though you're already married. That's sort of shocking. Now, someone who's in a bad marriage thinking about a divorce anyways might say, this is what good luck. But for other people, they would say, this is offensive. You're challenging a core part of my identity. And so the Liberals in the last month have managed to rally around the flag, and we're going to protect Canada from invasion. And we have to form a new alliance with other countries. And we're not your best friends anymore. Like, the Liberals are way overdoing it. It's Trump making a joke. And I'll tell you where the joke came from. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this in an interview with Catherine Herridge. He said, Donald Trump flew down to Mar-a-Lago. Sorry, Justin Trudeau flew down to Mar-a-Lago and have dinner with Trump. Trump said, what happens if we end this inequality, this trade inequality that we talked about? Trudeau answered, that would spell the end of Canada as we know it. To which Trump replied, well, then you should become a 51st state. So it was Trudeau who you could credit with the inception of the idea. Trudeau put the idea in Trump's brain that Canada could be vaporized, that Canada could disappear. Trudeau showed his greatest fear. Trudeau gave the words and the idea to Trump. I mean, could you imagine you're in a negotiation and you say, hey man, if you don't give me this deal, I don't even know if I could continue. Really? Yeah, Trudeau's never negotiated a thing in his life. You got to remember, Trudeau comes from Pierre Trudeau, his father, who was the prime minister in the 70s and 80s. And he never worked a day in his life. Trudeau's grandfather was the last Trudeau who ever worked for a living. He had a chain of gas stations and actually made millions. Pierre Trudeau lived the life of a sort of a Marxist academic who became prime minister. Justin Trudeau hasn't worked a day in his life until he decided one day he wanted to be prime minister. I remember once he said he had been to 90 countries before he was 40. Who? How? Like that, he's just a playboy living off his father's trust fund. Anytime he gets into trouble, his dad's lawyers or accountants fix him. He's never had to negotiate anything. And he goes down to tangle with this Manhattan real estate developer. I can't think of any industry in the world more cutthroat. I mean, maybe an arms dealer in Iraq or something. But other than that, can you imagine going up against... He wrote The Art of the Deal, for heaven's sake. I mean, whatever you want to say about Trump, the guy knows how to operate. And you go down there and say, Mr. President, if you don't give me my way, I'm worried my whole country will fall apart. Trudeau said that. And so ever since, Trump is calling him Governor Trudeau, 51st state, poke, 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 poke. And it's hilarious, except for a lot of Canadians are saying, oh, well, that's insulting, or maybe he means it. And the liberals have all, in fact, there's a Liberal Party leadership debate just a week ago. And a third of the conversation, maybe even a half, was how do we fight against Trump's annexation of our country? So ironically, paradoxically, Trump actually gave the left-wingers in Canada a weapon to use against Pierre Poilievre. They're calling Pierre Poilievre the conservative. They're saying he's MAGA North, or a mini Trump. That's what they're calling the conservative leader. And it's chipping away at his support for sure.
Now I guess, and I'm jealous that Canada got offered to be the 51st state. I kind of wish in the UK, being stuck where Stormer Wade got that offer, but hey, maybe you have the offer first. So I'm a bit jealous of that. But with the the Conservative Party with Pierre, obviously not against Trudeau. Trudeau is a really good opponent figure because he is such a weak, pathetic individual. But it looks like it'll be Mark Carney, who we know in the UK from being former governor of the Bank of England, or Chrystia Freeland. And all I know about her is she seems unstable. Watching videos of her being weird. What what does that mean for Pierre? Because Mark Carney will put his credentials as an economic genius, not tarred by Trudeau. Christia, I guess, has been the administration. How is that going to kind of play out up until October, this battle for control post Trudeau?
A few quick things. First of all, Chrystia Freeland, you're correct to point out that she's basically being Trudeau's deputy the whole time. She was foreign minister. She was our finance minister, your chancellor of the exchequer. Um, she was really the deputy on everything. You know what she did before she became an MP? You know what her last job was? She was the official biographer of George Soros. You can't make that up, can you? She was on the board of directors of the World Economic Forum. By the way, so was Mark Carney. I don't know if you know much about the World Economic Forum. I think you do. Klaus Schwab, this supervillain caricature of a sort of a frustrated supervillain tyrant or something, he once talked about penetrating the cabinets, and he mentioned Canada, where he said half the cabinet are WEF, and everyone said, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. No, it ain't. Literally, the two leading candidates to succeed Trudeau are both World Economic Forum directors. Now, it's going to go to Mark Carney by far, and you can see that they all know it. In the last debate, it was more like a Me Too-a-thon and Agree-a-thon. Chrystia Freeland knows she can't win, so she's sort of playing a supporting role, hoping that Mark Carney will be nice to her. But, you know, the world has watched as the UK went through leader after leader, in, you know, Rishi Sunak, I don't even remember, Liz Truss, all of them. But the one thing you can say about them is they were all members of parliament. Mark Carney has never been elected to anything. And yet on March 9th, he will immediately ascend to being our prime minister, even though he's not an MP. He's never won an election. And you might find this shocking. The Liberal leadership contest that he is set to win allows foreign nationals to vote. It allows children as young as 14 years old to vote. So you've got foreign citizens as young as 14 who are voting in a very sketchy online manner. You don't think this has been gamed and hacked by the People's Liberation Army? I mean, but even if it were a legitimate system, we don't know who Mark Carney is. We know he left Canada for greener pastures. We know he has both an Irish and a British passport. Why? We know he was the head of Brookfield Asset Management, which is like a slightly smaller version of BlackRock. And one of his final moves, very strange, literally like 2.5 months ago, is his last move as the chairman of this huge company was to move its head office from Canada down to the States. Like, what are you doing? Like, sure, you're making more money, and that may be the right thing to do for shareholders, but for God's sakes, do you have no loyalty to anyone or anything? We don't know anything about him. We don't know what his corporate entanglements are. He hasn't filled out any ethical disclosures. He's a stranger. He's a random guy on the street who happens to be a gazillionaire, and he is about to be selected, not elected. And, you know, he will absolutely say none of the scandals have tainted me. He'll absolutely say, I know how to handle economies. I was the Bank of England governor and the Bank of Canada governor, unlike Pierre Poilievre, who's just an MP. He will say those things. He is saying those things. And the regime media, as I call it, will absolutely clap for him. I think Pierre Poilievre's lead is strong enough that I think people are sick enough of the Liberals that Poilievre will win, but it's going to be a close run affair. By the way, the election should happen by October. It could happen earlier, as you know, in the parliamentary system. I've seen rumors that it might happen as soon as late April.
Wow. Well, I saw the re-election of Doug Ford in Ontario, and I'm assuming that's kind of a against the Trump's going to take us over panic. And by October, I'm assuming things will settle down, but you can never second guess politics. And I saw Pierre's attacks on carbon tax Carney and high tax Carney, and you're right, it does seem to be the focus is on him. But can I ask you about the attacks on freedom of speech? We saw the truckers back whenever they were attacked. Is the curtailment of free speech in Canada, is it kind of as bad as you've watched and seen in the UK, or has it not got to that level as yet?
It was about to get even worse. There was a law called Bill C-63 that was working its way through Parliament and was going to become law. That, however, was vaporized when Trudeau dissolved Parliament. Trudeau prorogued Parliament to avoid a non-confidence vote. So his own vanity and his own self-interest is all that saved us from Bill C-63. Let me take 60 seconds to describe Bill C-63. It made it an offense to expose a person, uh, publish anything, quote, likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. So maybe it'll happen in the future. Doesn't have, it's a future crime. Maybe, likely to, and not likely to hurt anyone in a physical way, likely to cause this guy to have hard feelings against that guy. So there's no defense to that. Truth is not a defense. Fair comment is not a defense. It's the subjective test of, did you cause hurt feelings? Or is it possible that you will cause hurt feelings? There's so many crazy things about that phrase. And the law was drafted that you didn't have to have any skin in the game to make a complaint. And complainants could get a bounty of tens of thousands of dollars for filing a complaint that was upheld. So it would create a cottage industry. Basically, anyone who likes to gripe in YouTube comments or Twitter comments would suddenly be able to file that gripe with the government. The government would investigate someone for sort of what you call a non-crime hate incident. And if it were upheld, the complainer would get a bounty of tens of thousands of dollars. And there were other provisions in there that preemptively you could ask for a hate restraining order against someone, against they haven't committed any crime whatsoever, but you could preemptively get house arrest, an anklet put on them, seizure of any firearms, a list of places they could not go, a list of people they could not talk to. This was in the law. There were huge fines in there for social media companies. I think 8% of global revenues, like tens of millions of dollars of fines, clearly targeting Elon Musk. There were so many awful things in there. There were the creation of 3 new censorship agencies. So it was called the Online Harms Bill, which I think is a similar name in Ireland, Scotland, and England.
It is.
But so it was going to get as bad, but we don't have the same spectacle of cops showing up, ding dong, we're here from the police for a social media post. We're not that bad as the UK. You know, I love to visit the UK. I'm a deep admirer of the United Kingdom. I love exploring the different countries. I also love Ireland too, I should tell you. And you know, I come from Calgary, Alberta, which is named after a little bay in Scotland. Our first prime minister was Scottish, Sir John A. Macdonald. We have a lot of roots in the UK. We love the UK and we should love it more and we should learn about it more. But whenever I go to the UK, I come back to Canada and I tell people, going to the United Kingdom and paying attention to things like mass immigration, the Islamification of public society, like the anti-Islamophobia ideas that are being bruited, the antisocial behavior, malicious communications thing, the censorship that Keir Starmer lied about to Trump and J.D. Vance the other day. Going to the UK, I come back and I think that is a dystopian time machine where I can see our future 5 years down the road if we don't pull back from it. Now, under Donald Trump, holy moly, they are fixing things in their country. And I mentioned earlier how Mark Zuckerberg has pledged to stand for free speech, not just at home, but abroad. And I don't know if you watched that Mark Zuckerberg speech carefully, but there was a line where he said, with the help of the State Department. And that's fair because, as you know, a multinational company has to abide by the local laws wherever they operate. And Facebook could say, we're going to uphold a First Amendment standard of free speech. That's Elon Musk's standard. But it doesn't work if you've got a judge like in Brazil, Alexandra de Moraes, who says, no, you got to take all that stuff down. Or Germany or France, like they ordered Rumble to come down in France a while back. You can't fight back as a company unless you got Uncle Sam on your side. So obviously, Zuckerberg and Trump made some sort of a deal. You see my point about Trump will always meet someone if he thinks there's a 1 + 1 = 3. So no matter how mean you've been to Trump, in fact, if anything, he will use that meanness as some sort of bargaining chip. Well, to expiate your sin, you have to do me these favors. Trump's a transactional guy. And that, if you get that, and if you don't allow yourself to become emotionally revved up by the nicknames and the taunts and the style, if you can handle that and focus on the transaction, you'll get a deal with them every time. I don't know what's up with the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. I don't know what's going on there. I got to think Trump's against that, but who knows? Maybe he literally doesn't care if the Brits are stupid enough to spend £9 billion on Mauritius. Maybe there's something he's getting in return. I don't know. Trump never goes to a meeting without a list of things he wants. He doesn't have even that Zelensky meeting. He only got irritated after like 35 minutes. Trump was trying to be a deal maker there.
Yeah, no, I watched the long interview, the long 45 minutes or so, until Zelensky was expelled from the White House, deported. You mentioned the online harms bill, and we have the online safety bill. Thank God it didn't pass there in Canada. We have the online safety bill, very similar, the Digital Services Act across in the EU. And it seems as though the UK and the EU were working together behind the scenes because they are very similar. And I think an 8% punishment on global turnover, so similar to what was proposed there in Canada. What was the I'm guessing know the answer, but the response to the legacy media, because in the UK, the legacy media said, online safety bill, we want children to be safe online. We don't want children to be hurt. We're for this. And zero response or concern about the curtailment of any freedom of speech. I'm assuming kind of the same conversation in Canada, but apart from Rebel News, was there any outlet that was actually standing up against that bill?
There were a few principled voices. There was a law professor from the University of Ottawa, Michael Geist, who was concerned about it. There were a handful of civil libertarians, but most were silenced. There's something in Canada called Canadian Journalists for Freedom of Expression, silent. PEN Canada, silent. Amnesty International, silent. Canadian Association of Journalists, silent. Why? I said this 10 years ago when I founded Rebel News. I said, soon, thinking I was quite clever, there will only be two kinds of journalists in Canada, those that are government funded and those that are government banned. That sounded a little crazy, but that's actually what it's become. In Canada, I'm about to tell you a statistic, and I promise you, Peter, I'm not exaggerating. When I say that 99% of Canadian journalists are subsidized in part or in full by the government, you're probably thinking, oh, come on, it's not 99%. It's actually more than that. There are 1,500 news organizations. There aren't even 1,500 in Canada, but somehow 1,500 are on the list. We did a subject access request for all the media companies that get Trudeau's media bailout. There were 1,500 names on it. There aren't even 1,500 newspapers in our country. That's how, like, everyone is on it. I could count on one hand's fingers the media that don't take money from Trudeau. Us, there's something called True North, there's something called the Western Standard, there's something called Counter Signal, and they're all little independent online outfits like us. That's it. I have just told you the entire list of journalists in Canada who do not take money from the government. And so if 1/3, for most newspapermen, 1/3 of their money comes from Trudeau. 1/3. For the CBC state broadcaster, I wonder if this is also true in the UK, Peter. Our CBC state broadcaster is larger than all other private media combined. It so distorts the conversation. Plus, if you're a private sector journalist and you're worried your company's going to lay you off, you're thinking, well, maybe I can apply for the CBC. So I got to tailor my reporting now to be a fit for their corporate culture. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same with the BBC. Your BBC is so large. I would now you have a somewhat healthier newspaper and TV culture. I love GB News, despite its flaws. I think it's the best thing out there. I think it's excellent. There are some newspapers that occasionally do the right thing. I mean, they have a blind spot on Tommy Robinson. I don't get it. I know they're like the Daily Mail. Their viewers love Tommy Robinson. The Daily Mail loves to hate Tommy Robinson. They know it sells papers, but I don't know why they hate him instead of love him, other than at the very high levels, they're probably told that's how it is. I don't propose that we get into deep conversations about Tommy Robinson, but that is something that more and more Americans have heard about. And you mentioned earlier that Rebel News has some paternity over that. That's true. We hired Tommy Robinson almost 10 years ago. He was doing home renovations. I called him up. I said, what are you literally doing? He said, I'm just doing some renos. I said, how much are you earning doing that? He lied. He told me a higher number than he was. I said, put your tools down and come do what you're meant to do. I said, Tommy Robinson, you were not put on this world to do drywall and carpentry. There's nothing wrong with drywall, honorable trades. I mean, I wish I had those skills, but Tommy Robinson's purpose in this world is not to do carpentry. It's to listen to and speak for his people, by which I mean the forgotten people. I don't know if you like Morrissey. I love Morrissey. And I like his politics a little bit too, by the way. Not everything, but I like Irish blood, English heart, if I got that right. He's got a song, I think it's called Lifeguard Sleeping Girl Drowning. He's very moody, that Morrissey, but he's got this line, she was nobody's nothing. She was nobody's nothing, talking about a girl who drowned. And I think of the 1,400 girls in Rotherham, numbers much higher, and I think of the probably 100,000 girls across the UK. Why didn't anyone care? Because they were nobody's nothing. They were just working class white girl, slags, and anyone who cares about gammon, like the racism, the classism. We don't understand classism in North America. We don't get it. It's just not a thing here, really. It's a thing there. You got your fancy pants London lawyers. You know, I won't get too deep into it, but we helped a young woman who went out one night to a bar. Next thing, she wakes up half naked in a house full of 5 migrants. She manages to get onto the street, screams, calls for help. Police come, pick her up, do a rape kit on her, 2 different DNA samples inside her. Police won't arrest the men. In fact, family comes down, tunes up the guys they're charged. Prosecutors declined to prosecute. Tommy got involved. We helped out. We had a law firm, I won't say which one, fancy London law firm. And I said, can you fill out this form for Chelsea? Chelsea was her name. Can you fill out this 1-page attempt to, it was an appeal. If the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK does not prosecute and you're the victim, there's a very simple form you fill out to ask for a reconsideration or an appeal of their decision not to prosecute. And it's really in simple language designed for lay people to fill out. So Chelsea got this form and I said, Chelsea, don't fill it out. And I'm a former lawyer, but I thought, you know what? I'm not practicing and I'm not a Brit. So we gave this extremely simple form to this top-notch law firm we were working with. And they said, oh, sure, we'll do that in minutes. Next day, I get an email from the firm. We had a meeting at the firm, and for reputational reasons, we will not be taking Chelsea's case. Chelsea is not political. I don't think Chelsea said a political thing in her life. Chelsea's just a regular gal from Sunderland who was raped. What reputational risk is there? She's a rape victim. But because the 5 accused rapists were Muslim men, migrants, this fancy pants law firm with its KCs, with its, these folks refused to be associated with her. What do you think of that?
Wow. Well, we've seen it time and time again. And we could go into that, but I won't. Just as a last comment, I want you to let us know what it is meant for Rebel News to fight for. I fight for freedom. I see freedom of speech as being one of the things that defines you, maybe the thing that defines you, Ezra, from back in Muhammad cartoons, the Danish cartoons, 2005, to starting Rebel in 2015, and freedom of speech, the freedom to express yourself, that's a fundamental value that you have. Yet it's not been easy. You've done it in the media and you've done it through the courts as well, which has a cost. Maybe just to finish, you can let people know kind of how they can actually stand with Rebel as you continue that fight, not only in Canada, but worldwide.
Well, it is expensive because typically we fight for free speech in the court of law. We were getting ready to challenge Bill C-63 if it were enacted and proclaimed. Luckily, it was vaporized because of Trudeau's selfishness. But we are constantly the target of defamation actions. The former chairman of the Canadian Human Rights Commission is currently suing us. We have, I don't know, half a dozen, and they're all SLAP suits. You know what that stands for? Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. They're all bad faith, malicious suits just to take up our time, our energy, and our money. So we crowdfund, and sometimes people get a little tired of hearing for us to crowdfund, but the crowdfunding is exactly what lets us be free. If I were to take money like the BBC or the CBC or 99% of the Canadian media, I wouldn't have any financial problems, but neither would I be able to cover some of the things that we cover. You just couldn't. Now, in the UK, we just hired, as you mentioned, Sammy Woodhouse, one of the 1,400 gals in Rotherham, the whistleblower, in fact. And I know that we have hired a lawyer for her in advance. She's met the lawyer's on retainer, because I know, Peter, and I think you know, she's going to be hassled, whether it's by South Yorkshire Police or Ofcom or whatever. I don't think they have jurisdiction over her, or she's going to be picked on because she speaks the truth. She's not like the 1,399 who stayed quiet. And I'm not disrespecting them. I'm saying Sammy is refusing to go quietly. And so she has to be shut up one way or another. So I can tell you right now, and I don't want this to be true, but I know it is true, that they will try and censor our British reporter, Sammy Woodhouse. I know they're going to. And we have a lawyer in Manchester who is ready for that. And he doesn't work for free. But that's the price we're going to pay as journalists, and hopefully our viewers support it. We're 10 years old. We turned 10 years old last month, and we have a staff of over 30. So obviously viewers like the approach we're taking. And when you're funded by your viewers, that's the best way of knowing if you're on track. Because if you do something stupid, you'll find out about it pretty quickly, as opposed to the BBC or the CBC. There's no corrective there. You can abandon your viewers, you can insult your viewers, you can offend your viewers, and there's no consequence to you as long as you're pleasing your master. The BBC and the CBC, as long as they please one viewer, Keir Starmer and Justin Trudeau, they'll continue to be funded. So we have to hustle every day by paying attention to our people, and we have to find talent that are valuable. I think Sammy Woodhouse is that for us, just like Tommy Robinson was in his day. Tommy was a little hard to handle. You can only imagine being his boss. I use that phrase very loosely. Tommy is not meant to have a boss. I enjoyed my time working with him, and we still help him out a lot. I don't know if you know this, Peter, but we set up a crowdfund campaign for his children before he went to prison. I promised Tommy, I don't want to be morbid, but I just have to say it. I think the British government wants Tommy to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either in prison or in another way. And I'm not saying that to be gross or to normalize that idea. But I think that, he's had more than 12 official threats on his life. According to police, they deliver him a handwritten warning called an Osmond warning, where they give him the details. And some of these people have been prosecuted and convicted. He has had 12 threats on his life so serious that the police have come to his house to talk to him about it. And then there's a question of, will he even survive inside prison? So we have set up a crowdfunding campaign at TommyRobinsonChildren.com, robinsonchildren.com, and 100% of the funds go to a trust fund set up for his 3 kids. Tommy doesn't have access to it. The kid's mom don't have access to it other than as the trustee of it. So it's just for the kids. I told Tommy, and again, I hate it to be negative, but someone's got to think of these things. God forbid what happens if I even hate to say it, but someone's got to think about it. And so we have a crowdfund at TommyRobinsonChildren.com, and we have transferred funds to it already, and it remains open, and we're transferring more funds. So that's what I'm doing in the meantime. He's got a legal team. I wish they were moving a little faster, trying to fight both his solitary confinement and the bogus Terrorism Act charge against him. I won't get into that now. I know we're almost at the end of our interview, but it's weird. I'm a Canadian. What am I doing? Where are the Brits? I'm not saying there's no Brits. I can see them whenever I go to Tommy's rallies. There's tens of thousands of people there. But where's the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Sunday? Where's the Times of London? Where's the Telegraph? Where's all these? Where even GB News, God bless them, my favorite channel in the world. They're a little shy about Tommy. You don't have to agree with every single thing in a man's life to support his fundamental principles. And the trouble with Tommy Robinson and people saying, "Ooh, I find him vile." I've seen that phrase used. Okay, well, so you're going to allow a terrible precedent to be set because you have an aesthetic distaste for him. So because you can't stomach certain things about him, which are a caricature of him, rumors about him, like I defy people to actually tell me what's disqualifying about him. He's had some criminal convictions. Oh, well, then we should let him be thrown into solitary for 9 months. The precedent that Tommy Robinson sets will one day be used against, well, not Pierce Morgan. He'll be the last to go. But will be used against Neil Oliver or Calvin Robinson or Dan Wooten or, Professor Starkey or Allison Pearson. Like, it's Tommy Robinson today, and once that precedent is there, it will be others tomorrow. My old friend John O'Sullivan used to tell me it's easier to fight in the first ditch than in the last ditch. Tommy Robinson is the first ditch. And if you choose not to fight in that first ditch because you're too prim and proper and you've got some caste class system thing in your mind and you don't like a guy who drops his T's or he talks like Michael Caine. So we can't be, unless he's got received pronunciation, he's not our kind dear. Okay. If you allow that to be the precedent, get ready for when that is used against you. And I don't care how fancy your English is then.
No, you, I think, have led the way as a journalist on standing up for Tommy, and it's great to see some of the names you mentioned there coming on board me more recently, and that is a very positive thing for where we are. Ezra, always love having you on, and the viewers and listeners can become a subscriber. Can Rebel News Plus, they can sign up on the website, they can become a subscriber and support the work you do as you continue to grow and go and report on things that no one else will talk about. So appreciate your time, Ezra. I know you're pulled everywhere. You pop up all over the world, different places. So I do appreciate sharing what's happening in Canada and also with Rebel with our viewers and listeners. So thank you, Ezra.
Well, thanks. Great to see you again. And I know you fight hard. In fact, we first met when you came to Canada to give us an update on Tommy Robinson. That was quite some time ago. So I know you've been in the trenches a long time too, and congratulations to you.
I was back 2018, I think. So it was good fun. But thank you, Ezra.